The void between stars held no mercy, and High Commander ZHKar had learned this truth across 4 centuries of life. He stood at the observation deck of the dreadnought Eternal Dominion, his 6 eyes tracking the distant speck of light that represented humanity's last desperate gasp. The colony ship. The humans called it Odyssey, a name pulled from their primitive mythology, as if ancient stories could save them from extinction. ZHKar's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among the Krevthak. After 3,000 years of unbroken conquest across 47 star systems, he had seen countless species make their final stands. The humans would be no different. The Krevthak Empire had achieved spaceflight when humans were still painting on cave walls. Their gravity manipulation technology alone represented an engineering achievement humanity couldn't comprehend for another millennium. ZHKar had personally commanded the subjugation of 6 species, each more advanced than these upstart primates from the 3rd planet of an unremarkable yellow star. The fleet assembled for this operation comprised 23 warships, each one larger than any vessel humanity had ever constructed. It was, by any reasonable military assessment, vast overkill. The human homeworld had fallen 6 months ago. Their few remaining colonies had been systematically eliminated over the following weeks. This colony ship, fleeing toward the outer rim with its cargo of survivors, represented the final chapter of human expansion into the cosmos. ZHKar had volunteered for this mission specifically because he collected endings. He had witnessed the last Vorith queen dissolve herself in acid rather than face capture. He had watched the final Praetorian monks extinguish their genetic torches rather than submit. Now he would observe the extinction of humanity, and the symmetry pleased him. High Commander, his tactical officer, VRE Kesh, approached with the characteristic deliberation of their species. The target vessel maintains its current heading. Our predictive algorithms confirm they have detected our pursuit fleet. ZHKar's primary eyes remained fixed on that distant point of light while his secondary eyes swiveled to regard his subordinate. Of course they have detected us. I ordered full military transponders active. Let them see what approaches. Let them understand the futility of resistance. The tactical officer's confusion was evident in the subtle shift of his carapace plates. You wish them to know we are coming? Should we not maintain the element of surprise? Surprise? ZHKar's mandibles spread wide. What need have we for surprise when facing the last remnants of a broken species? No, VRE Kesh, let them watch our approach. Let them calculate the tonnage of our warships, the yield of our weapons. Let them count the hours they have remaining. Terror has always been the most effective weapon, and I would deny them nothing in their final moments. The command deck of the Eternal Dominion represented the pinnacle of Krevthak military architecture. The gravity wells that powered their vessels created a comfortable 1.4 standard gravities, the pressure that molded Krevthak warriors into the galaxy's most formidable soldiers. Every console, every weapon station, every tactical display had been refined across 3 millennia of warfare. ZHKar had commanded from this very deck during the siege of Korvash, where his fleet had reduced an entire moon to debris in a demonstration that brought 7 systems to immediate submission. The humans possessed nothing that could threaten even one of his escorts, let alone the dreadnought itself. Intelligence reports from the human homeworld had been comprehensive before the final assault. Humanity's space military consisted of approximately 200 vessels, most of them converted civilian craft with minimal armament. Their actual warships numbered fewer than 30, and those had been eliminated in the opening hours of the invasion. The colony ship Odyssey had been a luxury liner before the war, hastily modified with whatever weapons its desperate passengers could install during their flight. ZHKar had reviewed the specifications himself. The vessel measured 2.3 kilometers in length, designed to transport 50,000 passengers in rotating habitat rings that provided artificial gravity through centrifugal force. Primitive, but functional for a species that had only achieved faster-than-light travel 73 years ago. Sensors confirm 34,000 life signs aboard the target vessel, VRE reported. Down from an estimated 47,000 at time of departure from the human colony designated New Lisbon. They appear to be rationing life support. ZHCAR considered this information with the detachment of a scientist observing bacteria in a dying petri dish. They sacrifice the weak to preserve resources for the strong. A logical choice, though ultimately meaningless. What is the current time to intercept? At our current velocity, we will achieve weapons range in 14 standard hours. However, the humans are burning their fusion drives at maximum output. They must know such acceleration is unsustainable. Their fuel reserves will be depleted in approximately 9 hours, at which point we can simply pace them until their life support fails. No. ZHCAR's response was immediate and firm. We will not wait for them to suffocate in the dark. I want a boarding operation. I want prisoners for the genetic archives. I want their data cores intact so that future Krefthak scholars can study the complete trajectory of human civilization from emergence to extinction. VRE-Kesha's hesitation was palpable. A boarding operation, High Commander. The tactical doctrine for such actions assumes hostile resistance. Our infantry would face combat in the enclosed spaces of the colony ship. Casualties could be significant. ZHCAR turned all 6 eyes upon his subordinate, and VRE-Kesh instinctively lowered his carapace in submission. You believe humans capable of inflicting significant casualties upon Krefthak shock troops? These primitives who were using chemical rockets for orbital launches when our ancestors were establishing the Third Empire? The High Commander's voice carried throughout the bridge, ensuring every officer heard his words. Let me educate you on the military capacity of humanity. Their soldiers train in 1 standard gravity. Their muscles, evolved for climbing trees on a death world where everything tried to kill them, provide them with strength that makes them dangerous to unarmored opponents in hand-to-hand combat. They are, by the standards of our encounters with species across this sector, physically formidable in their natural environment. He paused, letting the acknowledgement settle before delivering his conclusion. However, they are not in their natural environment. This colony ship maintains 0.8 standard gravities in its rotating sections. Our combat armor is rated for 2.5 standard gravities. Our soldiers will move through their corridors like their ancient gods, unstoppable and inexorable. If they choose to resist, they will die quickly. If they choose to surrender, they will die eventually. The outcome does not change. Only the duration varies. The bridge crew absorbed this assessment with the calm of soldiers who had heard similar declarations before dozens of previous operations. ZHCAR had never been wrong in his tactical projections. His record was flawless across 200 years of active military command. Why would humanity be any different? Prepare boarding teams, ZHCAR ordered. I want 6 assault groups, each comprised of 100 shock troops. We will breach their hull at multiple points simultaneously. The rotating habitat sections will be our primary targets. Secure the life support centers, the data cores, and the command bridge. Execute any humans who resist. Restrain those who surrender for transport to the genetic preservation facilities. VRE-Kesh acknowledged the orders and began coordinating with the infantry commanders. ZHCAR returned his attention to the observation window, watching that distant point of light grow incrementally larger as the gap between predator and prey narrowed with mathematical precision. He had often wondered what thoughts consumed a species in its final hours. Did they rage against the unfairness of the universe? Did they seek solace in their primitive religions? Did they simply retreat into denial, unable to process the reality of their extinction? The humans had proven surprisingly resilient during the invasion of their homeworld. They had fought with a savagery that reminded ZHCAR of the Kresh, a species that had similarly evolved from predators on a harsh planet. But resilience meant nothing without the technology to support it. Bravery could not overcome physics. Determination could not defeat mathematics. The Krevthak fleet outmassed the colony ship by a factor of 400 to 1. The engagement would not be a battle. It would be an execution, and ZH-Car intended to ensure it was conducted with the appropriate dignity. Hours passed with the steady rhythm of a military operation proceeding according to plan. The pursuit fleet maintained its heading, matching every minor course correction the colony ship attempted. The humans tried deploying decoys, electromagnetic chaff, even ejecting portions of their own ship in hopes of creating debris fields to slow pursuit. Each tactic was noted, analyzed, and determined to be ineffective. ZH-Car watched the tactical displays with the satisfaction of a master observing a novice struggle with problems that had been solved millennia ago. High Commander, the communications officer's voice carried a note of curiosity. We are receiving a transmission from the colony ship. Audio and visual. They are requesting negotiations. ZH-Car's mandibles spread in genuine amusement. They wish to negotiate the terms of their survival? Display the transmission. The main view screen activated, showing a human female of approximately 50 standard years. She wore the insignia of a civilian government official rather than military rank. Her face showed the strain of months in flight, deep shadows under her eyes, skin pale from recycled air and vitamin deficiencies. But her voice remained steady when she spoke. This is Governor Elena Vasquez of the colony ship Odyssey, representing the 34,000 human civilians under my protection. We know you are the Krevthak Empire's pursuit fleet. We know you have the military capacity to destroy this vessel. We are requesting the opportunity to negotiate terms of conditional surrender. ZH-Car studied her for a long moment, considering whether to respond at all. Finally, he activated his own transmission array. The Krevthak language would be translated by the basic universal interfaces both species possessed. I am High Commander ZH-Car of the Eternal Dominion. There are no terms to negotiate, Governor Vasquez. Your species attempted to resist the expansion of the Krevthak Empire. You failed. The price of that failure is extinction. This is not negotiable. This is inevitable. The human woman's expression showed fear, but also something else that ZH-Car had learned to recognize across his centuries of conquest. Defiance. We are not soldiers, High Commander. Most of the people on this ship are civilians. Children, elderly, scientists, teachers. They had no voice in humanity's resistance to your empire. I'm asking you to allow them to survive. Why? ZH-Car's question was genuine. Why should I allow any human to survive when your species has demonstrated both the will and capacity to develop weapons capable of threatening Krevthak interests? Today you have 34,000 survivors. In one generation, you would have 100,000. In 5 generations, millions. Your species breeds at a rate that concerns the Galactic Biological Council. If I allow you to live, I create a problem for my descendants to solve. Far more efficient to end your genetic line here, in the dark between stars, where your extinction will serve as a lesson to other species considering resistance. Governor Vasquez's composure cracked slightly, her eyes glistening with moisture that ZH-Car recognized as the human stress response. Then we're not asking for mercy, High Commander. We're asking you to face us. If you believe we're so dangerous, if you think we're worth hunting across the galaxy, then at least grant us the dignity of dying on our feet rather than being hunted like animals through space. ZH-Car considered this request with mild interest. You wish to fight? Very well. In approximately 8 hours, my boarding teams will breach your hull. You may resist as you see fit. It will make no difference to the outcome, but if it provides you comfort in your final moments, I will not deny you this small dignity. The transmission ended, and ZH-Car dismissed the view screen with a gesture. Prepare the assault teams for maximum resistance. The humans have chosen to die fighting. Honor their decision with overwhelming force. The bridge crew responded with efficient acknowledgments. ZHKar felt a small satisfaction that the humans would at least provide some resistance. Passive surrenders were tedious, and he had witnessed far too many of them across his long career. A species that chose to fight, even when facing certain extinction, demonstrated a quality he could respect even as he extinguished it from the universe. He returned to the observation window, watching the colony ship grow steadily larger against the backdrop of indifferent stars. In 8 hours, this would be over. In 8 hours, humanity would join the list of extinct species in the Krevthak archives, their genetic material preserved in stasis, their artifacts displayed in museums, their story reduced to a cautionary tale about the price of resisting the natural order of galactic civilization. High Commander ZHKar had witnessed 23 such endings. This would be his 24th, and he anticipated it would be unremarkable compared to the others. The assault teams assembled in the cavernous hangar bays of the Eternal Dominion with the precision of units that had conducted hundreds of similar operations. Each Krevthak shock trooper stood 3 meters tall in their combat armor, powered exoskeletons that amplified their already formidable strength by a factor of 20. The armor's gravity compensators allowed them to function in environments ranging from 0.1 to 4 standard gravities without any reduction in combat effectiveness. Infantry Commander Thraxon reviewed his troops with the critical eye of a warrior who had survived 150 boarding actions across 5 decades of service. The soldiers before him represented the Krevthak military's finest, veterans of the Praetorian pacification, survivors of the brutal close-quarters fighting during the siege of Corvash, specialists trained in the specific challenges of ship-to-ship combat where environments could shift from pressurized corridors to hard vacuum in seconds. Listen well, Thraxon's voice boomed across the assembly deck. We are facing humans. Individually, they are weaker than us. Their technology is inferior. Their tactics are primitive. But do not allow this to create complacency. These are the survivors of their species, and survivors are always dangerous because they have nothing left to lose. He paced before the assembled troops, his armored footsteps resonating through the deck plating. We will breach at 6 points simultaneously. Groups 1 and 2 will target the forward habitat rings where their command structure is located. Groups 3 and 4 will secure their engineering sections and life support systems. Groups 5 and 6 will sweep the aft sections where the majority of their civilian population is concentrated. Once we control their critical systems, they will have no choice but to surrender or suffocate. One of the younger soldiers, recently promoted from the training cadres, raised a foreclaw. Commander, intelligence reports indicate the humans may have removed the artificial gravity in portions of their ship. Should we adjust our tactics accordingly? Thraxon's mandibles clicked dismissively. Zero-gravity environments favor our armor's reaction control systems. We train extensively in null-G combat. Humans evolved in gravity. They will be disoriented and helpless in such conditions. If they have indeed disabled their rotating sections, they have done our work for us. The commander activated a holographic display showing the colony ship schematics, the data pulled from captured human databases during the invasion of their homeworld. The Odyssey was designed as a civilian transport, not a warship. Their hull plating is rated for micrometeorite impacts, not military-grade weapons. We will breach using shaped plasma charges. Each team will enter through corridors wide enough to accommodate 4 troopers abreast. Expect confined spaces, limited sight lines, and potential for ambush. Standard room clearing protocols apply. He highlighted several sections of the ship's interior. Human small arms are projectile-based weapons that rely on chemical propellants. Our armor is rated to withstand impacts from weapons 40 times more powerful than their most advanced military rifles. They may have improvised weapons, explosives, or traps. These could potentially cause armor damage if you are careless. Do not be careless. The troops absorbed this information with the calm of professionals who had heard similar briefings countless times. Boarding operations always carried risk, but the risk when facing humans was negligible compared to operations against species with equivalent technology. The Krevthak had fought the Vorath, whose bioelectric attacks could overload armor systems. They had battled the Sekthon, whose phase weapons could partially bypass physical shielding. Humans had bullets and explosives, technology the Krevthak had mastered and moved beyond 2,000 years ago. One final note, Thraxon's tone carried an edge of warning. High Commander Zhkar wants prisoners and intact data cores. This means we cannot simply vent atmosphere and collect the bodies. We will secure the ship section by section. Any human who surrenders is to be restrained and transported to the holding bays. Any human who resists will be eliminated with extreme prejudice. Are there any questions? Silence answered him. Good. We breach in 4 hours. Check your equipment. Review your assignments. And remember, you are Krevthak warriors. You are the instruments of Empire. You are unstoppable. The troops dispersed to their final preparations, and Thraxon allowed himself a moment of private reflection. He had fought humans once before, during the final assault on their homeworld's orbital defenses. The human soldiers had fought with desperate courage, even as their positions were systematically destroyed. They had inflicted surprisingly effective casualties using guerrilla tactics and improvised weapons. But courage meant nothing against overwhelming force. The humans had lost their homeworld in 17 days. This colony ship, filled with civilians and the few remaining military personnel who had escaped the conquest, would fall in 17 hours at most. Probably far less. The commander performed his own equipment check, running diagnostics on his armor systems. Power reserves at maximum. Weapons fully charged. Gravity compensators functioning within normal parameters. Medical nanites ready for deployment in case of injury. Communications linked to the tactical network. Everything was optimal, as it should be. As it always was. Thraxon had survived 150 boarding actions by assuming nothing and verifying everything. He would conduct this operation with the same meticulous attention to detail that had kept him alive across 5 decades of combat. Though he privately admitted the humans likely represented the least dangerous foe he had faced in years. Aboard the colony ship Odyssey, Captain Marcus Rivera stood in the command center and tried not to show the fear that twisted his gut into knots. Around him, the skeleton crew that operated the ship's critical systems worked with the focused intensity of people who knew their time was measured in hours, not days. The main display showed the Krevthak fleet, now close enough that individual vessels were distinct rather than a single cluster of contacts. 23 warships, any one of which could reduce Odyssey to expanding gas with sustained fire. Status of the evacuation to the core sections? Rivera directed the question to his executive officer, Commander Lisa Chen. She looked up from her terminal, her face drawn with exhaustion. 94% complete. We've moved everyone from the outer habitat rings into the central zero-gravity sections. The last groups are transitioning now. Another 40 minutes to finish. Life support status? Holding stable in the core sections. We've shut down everything else to conserve power and oxygen. Hull temperature is dropping in the outer rings, but we don't need those anymore. Rivera nodded, his mind running through the checklist of a plan that seemed increasingly insane every time he considered it. 3 months ago, when Odyssey fled from New Lisbon with every refugee they could cram aboard, he had been a civilian spacecraft pilot with 15 years of experience ferrying colonists between settled worlds. The colony ship's actual captain had died in the initial Krevthak bombardment of the colony's spaceport. Rivera had taken command by default, being the most experienced pilot among the survivors, and had spent every moment since trying not to think about the impossibility of his situation. Sir, Lieutenant James Park, their tactical officer, called from his station. The Krevthak fleet is decelerating. They'll match our velocity in approximately 3 hours, then move to boarding range. They're not even trying to be subtle about it. Of course not, Rivera replied bitterly. Why would they bother with tactics when they have overwhelming force? He moved to the central holographic display, studying the approaching fleet with the eye of someone who knew he was looking at instruments of extinction. Each Krevthak warship was a masterpiece of military engineering, built by a species that had perfected warfare across millennia. Odyssey was a civilian transport with hastily welded armor plates and a handful of weapons scavenged from the ruins of New Lisbon's defensive stations. The comparison was laughable. Message from medical, another crew member reported. Dr. Okonkwo says the transition symptoms are tapering off in the population. Most people have adjusted. Good, Rivera said. We're going to need everyone functional when they board. Commander Chen moved closer, lowering her voice so only Rivera could hear. Marcus, are you sure about this plan? We're betting everything on a theory. If we're wrong, we're condemning everyone to a death that could be even worse than a quick destruction. Rivera turned to face her, seeing the same doubt in her eyes that plagued his own thoughts every minute. Lisa, if we don't try this, we die anyway. The Krevthak don't take prisoners, not really. They want us for genetic samples and data archives. They're going to extinguish humanity and catalog our remains like butterflies pinned to a board. I'd rather die trying something than just wait for them to process us out of existence. He gestured to the main display, where the Krevthak fleet continued its inexorable approach. 3 months ago, when we ran from New Lisbon, I thought we might find somewhere to hide. Some remote system where we could build a new colony, preserve humanity even as a handful of survivors. But they've followed us across 40 light-years. They've hunted us through a dozen systems. They're not going to stop until we're extinct. So yes, I'm sure about this plan, because at least it gives us a chance. Chen studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right. I'm with you. We're all with you. But I want you to know that if this works, if we somehow pull this off, it's going to be the most insane military victory in human history. And if it doesn't work, Rivera added grimly, it'll be the most insane last stand instead. Either way, the Krevthak are going to get a surprise. He raised his voice to address the entire command center. Listen up, everyone. We've got approximately 3 hours before they board us. I want all final preparations completed in 2 hours. That gives us 1 hour to rest, to mentally prepare, and to make peace with what we're about to attempt. What we're about to do has never been done before, not by humanity, not by any species as far as we know. But we are the last humans. We are the survivors of Earth, of Mars, of New Lisbon, of every colony world the Krevthak have burned. We carry the memory of 10 billion dead. We carry the hope that somewhere, somehow, humanity might continue. And we are going to make the Krevthak regret ever underestimating us. The crew absorbed his words with various degrees of determination and fear. Rivera didn't blame them for the fear. He felt it himself, a cold weight in his chest that had been there since the first reports of Krevthak ships entering Earth's solar system 3 months ago. But fear could be useful. Fear kept you sharp. And they were going to need every advantage they could get. In the medical bay, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo moved between groups of refugees, checking vital signs and administering medication where needed. The transition to zero gravity had hit the population hard, particularly the children and elderly. Nausea, disorientation, muscle cramps, cardiovascular stress, all the typical symptoms of sudden exposure to microgravity. But they were adapting. Humans always adapted. That was their evolutionary advantage, she reflected. Other species specialized. Humans generalized. They could survive in climates from Arctic tundra to equatorial jungle. They could digest an improbable variety of organic compounds. And, as they were about to demonstrate, they could adapt to environments that would cripple species evolved for different conditions. Doctor, one of her medical assistants, a young man named David Wu, approached with a data pad. The latest blood work shows elevated stress hormones across the board, but the cardiovascular adaptations are proceeding faster than expected. I think being in 0G for 3 months during our flight has actually helped. People's bodies have already started compensating. Okonkwo reviewed the data with professional satisfaction. Good. Make sure everyone understands the importance of the calcium supplements and resistance training we've been doing. When the Krevthak board, we need people who can function in null G, not float helplessly while their bones demineralize. Wu's expression turned grim. Do you really think the captain's plan will work? The Krevthak are trained soldiers in powered armor. We're civilians who've been living off recycled rations for 3 months. We have one advantage they don't. Okonkwo replied. We've been living in 0 gravity for 3 months. Our children have been born in it. Our bodies have adapted to it. The Krevthak? They've spent their entire civilization living in gravity. They've built their technology, their tactics, their entire military doctrine around the assumption that gravity is constant. We're about to show them what happens when that assumption breaks. In the engineering section, Chief Engineer Robert Kowalski supervised the final modifications to Odyssey's power distribution systems with the focused intensity of someone who knew lives depended on his work. Around him, his small team of technicians made adjustments to systems that had been pushed far beyond their design specifications during 3 months of maximum burn across interstellar space. Status on the magnetic locks? Kowalski directed the question to his senior technician, Maria Santos. All installed and tested, Santos replied. We've got electromagnetic plates throughout the core sections. When we activate them, anyone with metal equipment will find themselves suddenly anchored to whatever surface they're near. And the gravity generators? Disabled in all rotating sections. We've spun down the habitat rings completely. Everything from Section 7 outward is now null G. It's going to make life uncomfortable for our people, but it'll be worse for the Krevthak. Kowalski nodded, running through his mental checklist one more time. The plan was simple in concept, insanely risky in execution. The Krevthak would breach the outer hull expecting to fight in a pressurized, gravity-normal environment. Instead, they would find themselves in 0 gravity, in unfamiliar corridors, facing defenders who had spent 3 months adapting to that exact environment. It was the only advantage they had, and they were betting everything on it. How long can we maintain life support in the core sections? Kowalski asked. Santos checked her readouts. At current population density? 6 days, maybe 7 if we really ration. After that, we'll start seeing CO2 buildup that the scrubbers can't handle. Then we better hope this works in the next 6 days, Kowalski muttered. Because if it doesn't, we're going to suffocate long before the Krevthak finish us off. Deeper in the ship, in the sections that had once been luxury accommodations for wealthy colonists and were now cramped refugee housing, families huddled together and tried to prepare for what was coming. Parents comforted children who didn't fully understand why they couldn't return to their normal quarters. Teenagers who had never known war suddenly found themselves being taught how to use improvised weapons by the few remaining soldiers who had survived the fall of New Lisbon. An elderly woman named Margaret Chen, who had been a professor of xenobiology before the invasion, floated in a corridor surrounded by a group of young adults who had volunteered for the defense teams. The Krevthak evolved on a high-gravity world, she explained, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Their homeworld has approximately 1.4 times Earth's gravity. This means their bodies are built to operate under constant pressure. Their muscles, their cardiovascular systems, their inner ears, everything assumes gravity will pull them toward a surface. She used a data pad to display images of Krevthak anatomy, pictures captured from intelligence reports before Earth fell. In 0 gravity, they will be disoriented. Their combat armor has reaction control systems, small thrusters that let them maneuver in null-G environments. But those systems are technological compensations for biological limitations. You, on the other hand, have been living in zero gravity for 3 months. Your bodies have adapted. Your inner ears have recalibrated. Your proprioception has adjusted. You have become creatures of Nulgi in a way the Krevthak can never match without extensive training. One of the young volunteers, a girl who couldn't have been older than 19, raised her hand. But they have powered armor. They have weapons that can blow through walls. How are we supposed to fight that? Margaret's expression softened. You fight it by using the environment. You fight it by being where they don't expect, moving in ways they can't predict, using their assumptions against them. A Krevthak soldier in powered armor expects to plant their feet and unleash devastating firepower. What happens when there's no ground to plant their feet on? What happens when their heavy armor becomes a liability instead of an advantage? The girl considered this, then nodded slowly. Others in the group showed varying degrees of understanding and fear. Margaret continued, knowing that every minute of preparation could mean the difference between survival and extinction. I'm not going to lie to you. Many of us are going to die. The Krevthak are experienced warriors with superior technology. But we have something they don't, we have nothing left to lose, and everything to fight for. We are the last humans. After us, there is only extinction. So we fight not because we think we'll win, but because we refuse to go quietly into the dark. Across the ship, similar conversations were happening in dozens of compartments. Soldiers who had survived the fall of Earth shared hard-won tactical knowledge with civilians who had never fired a weapon. Engineers explained how to use the ship's systems as weapons. Medical personnel taught trauma response for combat injuries. And throughout it all, a grim determination settled over the 34,000 souls aboard Odyssey. They were not soldiers. They were not warriors. But they were the last remnants of a species that had climbed from caves to the stars in 10,000 years, and they would not surrender without a fight. High Commander ZHKar watched the final approach with professional satisfaction. The Eternal Dominion and her escort vessels had matched velocity with the colony ship, maintaining a distance of approximately 500 kilometers. At this range, the human vessel filled the observation windows, its 2.3-kilometer length illuminated by the light of a distant star. The ship showed visible damage from its long flight. Scorched hull plating where emergency repairs had been made, irregular heat signatures suggesting inconsistent life support, and a complete absence of the running lights that typically marked civilian vessels. The habitat rings have stopped rotating, Vrikesh reported from his tactical station. Sensors indicate they've disabled the artificial gravity in the outer sections. ZHKar's mandibles clicked in confusion. They've disabled their own gravity? Why would they do such a thing? Zero-gravity environments cause significant physiological stress to species evolved in gravity wells. Unknown, High Commander. Perhaps their systems have failed? The ship has been running at maximum acceleration for 3 months. Multiple systems may have exceeded operational limits. It was a reasonable explanation, ZHKar supposed, though it seemed unlikely the humans would allow such a critical system to fail without attempting repairs. More likely, they had shut down unnecessary systems to preserve power for life support in their final hours. It makes no difference, ZHKar declared. Our troops train extensively in Nulgi combat. If anything, the humans have made our task easier by removing their own gravitational advantage. Proceed with the boarding operation. Infantry Commander Thraxon acknowledged the order from his assault ship, one of 6 craft detaching from the Eternal Dominion and accelerating toward the colony ship. Each assault craft carried 100 shock troopers in full combat armor, weapons loaded, systems primed for the violent entry that would commence humanity's final chapter. The assault craft closed the distance in minutes, their advanced drives allowing precise maneuvering at ranges that would have been impossible for human vessels. Thraxon monitored the tactical display from his position at the head of Assault Group 1, watching as his craft aligned with a specific section of Odyssey's hull. The target point had been selected by the fleet's tactical computers, a corridor junction that provided access to 3 different sections of the ship's forward habitat ring. 30 seconds to breach, the pilot announced. Thraxon's squad leaders acknowledged, their troops already secured in the deployment formation that would see them pour through the breach point in seconds once the hull was compromised. The commander felt the familiar tightening in his combat glands, the Krevthak physiological response to imminent conflict. Around him, 99 other soldiers prepared for violence with the calm efficiency of warriors who had done this countless times before. Breach in 10 seconds. The assault craft's plasma charges activated, their magnetic containment fields glowing with barely restrained energy. 5 seconds. 3. Breach. The plasma charges detonated against Odyssey's hull with a blast that vaporized metal and composite armor in a sphere of superheated gas. The assault craft's magnetic couplers locked onto the edges of the new opening, creating an airtight seal that would allow the Krevthak to board without losing atmosphere. Except there was no atmosphere to lose. As Thraxon's helmet sensors analyzed the environment beyond the breach, they reported a stunning fact: the corridor on the other side was already in vacuum. Atmospheric pressure 0, Thraxon's tactical officer confirmed. No life support active in this section. Temperature reading -50 degrees Celsius. The commander hesitated for only a moment. This was unexpected, but not unprecedented. Species in their death throes often made irrational decisions. The humans had apparently vented their own atmosphere, perhaps hoping to deny the Krevthak an easy victory. It would not save them. Deploy, Thraxon ordered, and his troops poured through the breach. The Krevthak shock troopers emerged into a darkened corridor that stretched in 2 directions from the breach point. Emergency lighting provided minimal illumination, casting strange shadows from their armored forms. Thraxon's helmet display switched to enhanced vision modes, painting the corridor in false colors that highlighted heat signatures and structural features. No contacts, reported squad leader Kreshven from the forward element. Corridor appears empty. No defenders visible. Advance to Objective Alpha, Thraxon commanded. Maintain combat spacing. Watch for ambush. The troops moved forward with textbook precision, their armored boots magnetic clamping engaging to provide purchase against the deck plating. Without this feature, they would have been floating helplessly in the zero-gravity environment, but Krevthak combat doctrine had long ago addressed null-G warfare. The magnetic clamps allowed them to walk across any ferrous metal surface, maintaining their footing and combat effectiveness even in the absence of gravity. Or so they believed. What infantry commander Thraxon didn't know, what none of the Krevthak invaders could have known, was that the humans had spent 3 months preparing for exactly this moment. What he didn't know was that the empty corridors ahead weren't empty at all, but filled with defenders who had learned to move in zero gravity with a grace that would have seemed impossible to species evolved under gravity's constant pull. What he didn't know was that the magnetic deck plating his troops relied upon had been specifically prepared by Chief Engineer Kowalski and his team, wired to a central control that could reverse polarity at the touch of a button. What he didn't know was that every assumption his species had made about human weakness in zero gravity was about to be catastrophically disproven. And what he definitely didn't know was that Captain Marcus Rivera was watching his every move from a concealed position 50 meters ahead, waiting for the precise moment when the maximum number of Krevthak troops had committed to the corridor, and preparing to give an order that would change the engagement in ways the enemy could never anticipate. Rivera's hand hovered over the communications trigger, his heart pounding in his chest, his mouth dry despite the recycled water he'd consumed an hour earlier. Around him, 30 human defenders floated in perfect stillness, their bodies oriented in 3 dimensions that the Krevthak, with their gravity-dependent thinking, would never expect. Above them, below them, behind structural supports and air vents and maintenance hatches, another 70 defenders waited with weapons that weren't designed for shipboard combat but would serve well enough for what needed to be done. All groups report ready, Commander Chen's voice whispered through Rivera's helmet comm. We have 583 Krevthak troops inside the ship. Breach points secured. They're moving toward the objectives exactly as we predicted. Rivera watched the lead Krevthak element advance, their magnetic boots providing them the illusion of stability, the false comfort of ground beneath their feet even in the absence of gravity. They moved like soldiers who believed they controlled the battlefield, and why wouldn't they? They had superior armor, superior weapons, superior numbers. They had every tactical advantage except one: they were fighting in an environment they merely trained for, against an enemy that had been born to it. Execute Phase 1, Rivera commanded, and Chief Engineer Kowalski, monitoring from the engineering section, pressed a button that reversed the polarity on every magnetic plate in the forward sections. Simultaneously, the emergency lighting shut off completely, plunging the corridors into absolute darkness. The effect on the Krevthak troops was immediate and catastrophic. Infantry Commander Thraxon felt his boots suddenly repel from the deck plating instead of attracting to it, launching him upward into the zero-gravity void. Around him, 99 other soldiers experienced the same sudden loss of contact, their magnetic clamping systems now actively pushing them away from the surfaces they had relied upon for stability. In the pitch darkness, with their visual sensors suddenly overloaded by the transition from emergency lighting to complete absence of light, the Krevthak troops tumbled through space, their reaction control systems struggling to compensate for the unexpected loss of orientation. Ambush! Thraxon roared across the tactical net, his combat computer automatically activating his armor's RCS thrusters to stabilize his position. But the thrusters were designed for fine maneuvering in space combat, not for rapid course corrections in confined corridors. His first thruster burn sent him careening into a bulkhead with an impact that set off damage warnings in his helmet display. Around him, his troops were experiencing similar disasters, their heavy armor that had seemed like such an advantage now revealed as a liability in the Nulgi environment. And then the humans attacked. They came from above and below, from vents and hatches, from angles that made no sense to warriors whose entire tactical doctrine assumed a single, down, direction. They moved through the darkness with absolute confidence, their eyes adapted to the lack of light, their inner ears calibrated to the absence of gravity, their muscles trained through 3 months of constant practice in this exact environment. A young human woman named Sarah Chen, who had been a graduate student in physics before the invasion, launched herself from a ceiling vent with a push that sent her gliding silently toward a Krevthak soldier still struggling to activate his reaction controls. She carried a weapon improvised from a mining laser, modified to fire in short, controlled bursts that wouldn't penetrate the ship's hull but could potentially damage power armor at close range. Her target never saw her coming. The mining laser's beam intersected with the Krevthak's armor at the vulnerable joint between helmet and chest plate, where flexibility requirements meant slightly thinner protection. The superheated beam burned through seals and into the soft tissue beneath, and the soldier's scream cut off abruptly as his suit lost pressure. Sarah didn't wait to confirm the kill. She was already pushing off from the dead soldier's armor, using the contact to alter her trajectory toward her next target, moving through 3 dimensions with the fluid grace of a dancer. Around her, 29 other defenders were executing similar attacks, hitting the disoriented Krevthak from unexpected angles, using weapons ranging from improvised lasers to simple steel pipes that became devastating clubs when wielded with the full force of a body mass traveling at 10 meters per second in 0 G. Thraxon finally managed to stabilize himself using his RCS thrusters, his armor's computer compensating for the reversed magnetic fields by simply disabling the boot clamps entirely. His enhanced vision systems adjusted to the darkness, painting the corridor in thermal imaging that revealed the horrifying truth of their situation. His troops were scattered throughout the corridor, tumbling in uncontrolled spins or struggling with their reaction controls. And between them, moving with impossible confidence in the Nulgi environment, were dozens of human defenders using the 3-dimensional nature of the space in ways his soldiers couldn't match. "Form up," he ordered across the tactical net. "Squad leaders, establish defensive perimeters. Use sustained thruster burns to create stable firing positions." Some of his troops managed to comply, their training and experience allowing them to adapt even to this unexpected situation. A defensive formation began to coalesce as soldiers oriented themselves toward the corridor walls, using their armor's superior sensors to track the darting human targets. Weapons fire began to light up the darkness, plasma bolts and kinetic rounds designed to penetrate heavy armor. Several humans died in those first seconds of coordinated fire, their improvised armor no match for military-grade weapons. But for every human that died, they took a Krevthak with them, and the exchange rate was far different than what Thraxon had expected. His initial assault force of 100 troops had been reduced to 73 effectives in less than 3 minutes of engagement. 7 were dead, killed by the surprise attack before they could orient themselves. 20 were damaged, their armor reporting power failures, thruster malfunctions, or compromised life support seals. And the humans kept coming. Assault Group 1 to command, Thraxon transmitted to the Eternal Dominion. We are engaged with hostile forces. Enemy is using null-G tactics with unexpected proficiency. Requesting immediate support from Groups 2 and 3. High Commander ZHKar received the transmission in the command center of his dreadnought, and for the first time in his long military career, he felt something that might have been uncertainty. Assault Group 2 and 3, advance to support Group 1, he ordered. All groups, be advised, enemy is demonstrating advanced null-G combat capability. Adjust tactics accordingly. But even as he gave the order, ZHKar was reviewing the tactical feeds from Thraxon's helmet camera, watching humans move through the zero-gravity environment with a skill that shouldn't have been possible for a species that had only achieved spaceflight 73 years ago. How had they adapted so quickly? How had they turned their own weakness into an advantage? The answer, had ZHKar known to look for it, lay in the fundamental difference between a species that visited space and a species that lived in it. The Krevthak had been spacefaring for 3 millennia, but they had always brought gravity with them, carried their homeworld's pressure in the form of advanced generators that created comfortable 1.4G environments wherever they went. They visited space the way humans might visit a hostile wilderness, with all the tools and protections needed to maintain their natural environment. But the humans aboard Odyssey had spent 3 months with no choice but to adapt. 3 months where children played in null-G, where adults worked and ate and slept in the absence of weight, where bodies that had evolved over millions of years under Earth's gravity were forced to recalibrate every assumption about movement and orientation. The elderly had suffered. Many had died. The weak had not survived. But the survivors, the 34,000 people still alive aboard Odyssey, had been winnowed down to those who could not only survive in zero gravity but thrive in it. And now, facing the Krevthak invaders, they brought that adaptation to bear in ways the enemy had never anticipated. In Corridor 7 Alpha, the survivors of Assault Group 1 had finally managed to establish a defensive position, their backs to a bulkhead, their weapons oriented toward the approach routes they could observe with their enhanced sensors. It was a tactically sound position by any normal standard, a formation that should have allowed them to control the corridor and suppress any counterattack. What they failed to account for was that in zero gravity, there is no back to the wall because there are no walls, only surfaces. And while they watched the obvious approach routes, the humans attacked from behind. Chief Engineer Robert Kowalski himself led this assault, a 58-year-old man who had spent 30 years working on spacecraft and knew the interior of ships the way other people knew their own homes. He had spent the last 3 months memorizing every access panel, every maintenance shaft, every route through Odyssey's internal structure that didn't show on the standard schematics the Krevthak had captured from Earth's databases. Now he emerged from a service hatch that the enemy's sensors had dismissed as too small for a human to use, his body oriented perpendicular to the corridor's main axis, a bundle of improvised explosives in his hands. He didn't hesitate. Didn't second guess. Simply activated the timer and pushed the bundle toward the clustered Krevthak soldiers, using the same zero-G maneuvering skills that had allowed him to spend hours repairing satellite stations in Earth orbit decades ago. The explosives detonated 3 seconds later, and while they weren't powerful enough to breach the hull or cause catastrophic damage to the ship's structure, they were more than sufficient to shred the vulnerable joints and seals in powered armor that had never been designed to face explosions from behind. 8 Krevthak soldiers died instantly, their armor torn open by shrapnel. Another 12 were damaged, some critically. And in the chaos and confusion that followed, the human defenders swarmed the survivors, hitting them from 6 different directions simultaneously, using the three-dimensional nature of combat in a way that no amount of Krevthak training had prepared them for. Infantry Commander Thraxon died in that assault, killed by a teenage boy named Marcus Okafor who had been an apprentice machinist before the invasion and now wielded a metal bar with the cold efficiency of a trained killer. The boy's strike caught the commander's helmet at precisely the right angle to crack the faceplate seal, and Thraxon had 5 seconds to contemplate the impossibility of his death before his lungs explosively decompressed in the vacuum. Aboard the Eternal Dominion, High Commander ZHKar watched his tactical displays with growing horror as Assault Group 1 status indicators turned from green to red, one after another, until the entire group was listed as combat ineffective. 73 dead. 27 damaged but potentially recoverable if someone could reach them before their life support failed. 0% mission success. Assault Groups 2 through 6, halt advance, ZHKar ordered, his voice tight with suppressed anger. Regroup at the breach points and establish secured perimeters. Do not advance until I give explicit authorization. He turned to Vrikesh, who was staring at the tactical displays with an expression that might have been fear. How? ZHKar demanded. How are primitive humans defeating our shock troops in Nulji combat? We train for this. We have superior equipment. This should not be possible. High Commander, Vrikesh's voice was hesitant. I believe the humans have been living in zero gravity for an extended period. Their bodies have adapted. They move through Nulji the way we move under gravity. It's not a skill they've trained. It's become their natural environment. ZHKar's mandibles spread in a gesture of rejection. That's impossible. Humanoid species cannot adapt to Nulji in 3 months. The physiological changes required would take generations of evolution. Then I cannot explain what we're observing, Vrikesh replied. But the tactical reality is clear. In the zero-gravity sections of this ship, our troops are at a severe disadvantage. The humans have turned their own environment into a weapon against us. ZHKar studied the displays for a long moment, his mind working through tactical options with the speed of a commander who had fought hundreds of engagements. The humans had surprised him, had demonstrated capabilities he hadn't anticipated. But surprise was not victory. The Krevthak still had 500 troops aboard Odyssey, with thousands more available from the fleet. They still had overwhelming firepower, superior technology, and the option to simply destroy the entire colony ship if boarding proved too costly. But ZHKar didn't want to destroy Odyssey. He wanted prisoners. He wanted data cores. He wanted the satisfaction of ending humanity properly, with dignity and completeness. Destroying the ship would leave questions unanswered, genetic samples uncollected, the final chapter of human history incomplete. New tactical plan, ZHKar announced. We will adapt to the humans' Nulji advantage by removing it. Target the colony ship's remaining power systems. I want controlled plasma strikes that disable their life support and artificial gravity generators without destroying the hull integrity. Once they lose power, they lose their environmental control. We'll flood the ship with our own atmosphere, re-establish gravity using our portable generators, and force them to fight in conditions that favor us. Vrikesh's mandibles clicked in approval. An elegant solution, High Commander. Estimated time to implement? Begin bombardment immediately. Focus on the aft sections where their engineering spaces are located. Precision strikes only. I want this ship intact, just powerless. The Eternal Dominion's weapons systems came online, targeting sensors painting multiple points on Odyssey's hull where intelligence suggested critical systems were located. The Dreadnought's plasma cannons, normally used to reduce enemy vessels to expanding clouds of debris, were dialed down to minimum power, set to burn through armor and destroy internal systems without causing explosive decompression. It was a delicate operation, requiring precision that few Krefthak commanders would have attempted. But ZH-Car was not a typical commander, and he had performed similar operations during the pacification of 6 previous species. He knew exactly how much force to apply to disable without destroying. The first plasma bolt struck Odyssey amidships, burning through outer armor and into the ship's primary power distribution nexus. The effect was immediate. Entire sections of the colony ship went dark as power failed, emergency batteries kicking in to maintain minimal life support in those areas that still had atmosphere. Good, ZH-Car observed with satisfaction. Continue bombardment. Target their backup generators, their fuel reserves, anything that can provide power. I want them helpless in 20 minutes. But what ZH-Car didn't know, what he couldn't have known without understanding the human capacity for creative desperation, was that Captain Rivera had anticipated exactly this response. In the engineering section, Chief Engineer Kowalski received the damage reports with grim satisfaction. "They're doing exactly what we thought they would," he reported to Captain Rivera over the command net. "Taking out our power systems without destroying the hull. They still want us alive. How long before we lose main power completely?" Rivera asked. "At their current rate? 15 minutes, maybe 20. After that, we're running on emergency batteries, and those will last maybe 6 hours before life support starts failing in the populated sections." "That's fine," Rivera replied. "We don't need 6 hours. We need 30 minutes. Can you give me that?" "I can give you 30 minutes, Kowalski confirmed. "But after that, we're dead in the water. Literally and figuratively. Then let's make those 30 minutes count. Proceed with Phase 2. Throughout Odyssey, the surviving defenders received the command with various degrees of determination and terror. Phase 2 was the truly insane part of their plan, the element that made even the Null-G ambushes seem reasonable by comparison. They were going to actively invite the Krefthak deeper into the ship. The remaining assault groups, having established defensive perimeters at their breach points, reported to Infantry Commander Kelvoth, now the senior Krefthak officer aboard Odyssey following Thraxon's death. "Sir, the humans appear to be retreating from the outer sections. We're detecting movement toward the ship's core, mass concentration in the 0G sections near the central axis." Kelvoth studied the tactical display suspiciously. After what had happened to Group 1, he wasn't inclined to trust any human action that seemed tactically favorable to the Krefthak. Could be another trap. They lured Group 1 into an ambush. They may be trying to concentrate our forces for another attack. Possible, his tactical officer agreed. But High Commander ZH-Car's bombardment is systematically destroying their power infrastructure. They may simply be retreating to areas where life support is still functioning. It was a reasonable assessment, supported by the tactical data. The humans were clearly not suicidal. They had families, children, civilians who needed breathable atmosphere and temperature control. As their ship lost power, they would naturally consolidate in the areas that still had life support. Standard evacuation procedures for any damaged vessel. "Advance cautiously," Kelvoth ordered. "All groups, move toward the ship's central core. Maintain combat spacing. Watch for ambushes. If you encounter resistance, establish firing positions and call for support. We will advance methodically, securing each section before proceeding to the next." The Krefthak troops acknowledged and began their advance, moving through the darkened corridors of Odyssey with their weapons ready and their sensors at maximum sensitivity. They moved slowly now, carefully, having learned from Group 1's disaster that the humans were far more dangerous than anticipated. What they didn't realize was that the humans wanted them to advance slowly. Wanted them to penetrate deeper into Odyssey's interior. Wanted them to commit their forces to the central sections where the colony ship's most critical secret waited. In a section that had once been Odyssey's main cargo hold, 5,000 human defenders waited in absolute silence and darkness. They floated in precise formations, their bodies oriented in patterns that would have seemed random to any outside observer but represented months of careful planning and training. Each defender had been equipped with whatever weapons could be improvised from the ship's remaining resources. Mining lasers, cutting torches, metal bars, even simple lengths of cable that could be used to entangle an armored opponent in 0G. Most carried multiple weapons, knowing they would need backups when the primary options failed. Among them floated Captain Marcus Rivera, Commander Lisa Chen, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, and hundreds of others who had been civilians before the invasion. Teachers and engineers, artists and scientists, parents and children, all united by the knowledge that they were about to attempt something no human force had ever done before. They were going to defeat a technologically superior enemy through pure adaptation to an environment that enemy couldn't match. All defenders, this is Rivera, the captain's voice whispered across thousands of helmet comms. The Krevthak are advancing toward our position. In approximately 5 minutes, they will enter the cargo hold. When they do, we hit them with everything we have. Remember your training. Use the three-dimensional space. Attack from unexpected angles. Don't try to fight their armor head-on, target the joints, the seals, the vulnerable points. Work in teams. Support each other. And remember, we are fighting for the survival of our species. There is no falling back. There is no second chance. This is our stand. The defenders absorbed his words in silence, their fear balanced by determination and the cold mathematics of extinction. If they failed here, humanity ended. That knowledge focused the mind wonderfully. The first Krevthak troops entered the cargo hold cautiously, their enhanced sensors sweeping the massive space for threats. The hold was 200 meters long, 80 meters wide, and 30 meters high, a cavernous volume that had once stored the supplies and equipment for establishing a new colony. Now it was empty, just void and darkness and silence. Cargo hold appears clear, the lead squad reported. Proceeding to far end to establish secured route to central core sections. More troops followed, drawn by the tactical necessity of securing such a large space. You couldn't leave a volume this size unsecured in your rear, it could house hundreds of enemies waiting to attack your supply lines. Infantry Commander Kelvatha's tactical doctrine demanded the hold be cleared and controlled before advancing further. 50 Krevthak soldiers entered. Then 100. Then 200, spreading out through the volume in standard search patterns, their magnetic boots disabled after Group 1's disaster, their reaction control systems struggling to provide the stable movement that gravity would have given them naturally. And then the cargo hold's remaining lights activated at maximum intensity, and 5,000 human defenders attacked from every direction simultaneously. The Krevthak had numerical superiority. They had better armor and better weapons. They had training and experience that the humans couldn't match. What they didn't have was any doctrine, any tactical framework, any military tradition that prepared them for combat against an enemy that could attack from 360 degrees at once, using the three-dimensional nature of space in ways that violated every assumption built into Krevthak military theory. A grandmother named Helen Morrison, who had taught 0G ballet on Mars before the invasion and was now 67 years old, launched herself from a ceiling support with the precision of a professional dancer. She carried a cutting torch modified to fire in controlled bursts, and her trajectory took her through a gap between two Krevthak soldiers that would have seemed impossibly narrow to anyone who hadn't spent 40 years moving through 3 dimensions. Her torch burned through the knee joint of a soldier who never saw her coming, and she was already pushing off from his collapsing armor toward her next target before his scream cut off. A 14-year-old boy named James Chen, who should have been in school learning mathematics and instead had spent 3 months learning to kill, used a simple steel cable to entangle a Krevthak soldier's weapon arm. The soldier tried to bring his secondary weapon to bear, but James had already reversed his momentum using a touch against a bulkhead, and now he was behind the enemy, wrapping more cable around the soldier's helmet, using his full body weight to yank the head back in a move that would have been impossible under gravity but worked perfectly in null G. The helmet's seal cracked, and another Krevthak died to improvised weapons wielded by desperate humans who had nothing left to lose. Across the cargo hold, similar scenes played out hundreds of times. The Krevthak tried to establish defensive positions, tried to create firing lanes and overlapping fields of fire, tried to implement the tactical doctrines that had served them for 3 millennia of conquest. But every doctrine assumed combatants would fight in 2 dimensions, with up and down clearly defined. The humans recognized no such limitations. Infantry Commander Kelvoth watched his force dissolve in real time, his tactical displays showing casualty rates that seemed impossible. "All units, fall back to breach points," he ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Disengage and retreat. We cannot hold this position." But disengaging from combat in zero gravity proved far harder than in normal conditions. On a planet's surface, a fighting retreat meant establishing a rear guard that would hold position while the main force withdrew. In null G, there was no holding position unless you were physically anchored to something. The Krevthak soldiers tried to use their RCS thrusters to maneuver toward the exits, but those systems were designed for fine adjustments, not tactical movement under fire. Many soldiers burned through their thruster fuel trying to escape, only to find themselves drifting helplessly in the void while human defenders closed in from all sides. Others made it to the cargo hold's exits, only to discover that Captain Rivera's defenders had anticipated the retreat and positioned ambush teams in every corridor leading away from the hold. The slaughter continued for another 8 minutes before the last Krevthak soldier in the cargo hold either died or managed to escape back toward the breach points. When silence finally fell, the human defenders floated among the debris and bodies, their improvised weapons stained with alien blood, their own casualties scattered among the enemy dead. Of the 5,000 humans who had entered the battle, approximately 3,200 survived. The Krevthak had lost 287 of the 319 soldiers who had entered the cargo hold. It was a victory, but it had cost them dearly. Captain Rivera floated among his surviving people, watching medics attend to the wounded, listening to the quiet sobs of those who had lost friends and family in the fighting. The price of survival was measured in blood and trauma, and he knew these people would carry the scars of this day for the rest of their lives, however long those lives might be. "Captain," Commander Chen's voice came across his comm, tight with controlled urgency. "The Krevthak fleet is repositioning. Looks like they're preparing for a full-scale bombardment. I think we've pissed them off enough that they're done trying to take us alive." Rivera felt the cold weight of that assessment settle in his chest. How long before they're in position to fire? 10 minutes, maybe 15. Once they start, our hull won't last long. They've been holding back to preserve us for capture. If they decide to just destroy us instead, we're looking at maybe 3 minutes before catastrophic structural failure. 3 minutes. After everything they'd accomplished, after proving that humans could fight and win against a technologically superior enemy, they were going to die anyway because the Krevthak had the option to simply flip the board and end the game. "Not acceptable," Rivera said quietly. "I didn't bring us this far to die now. Chen, get me a channel to the Krevthak flagship. I want to talk to their commander directly." "Sir, I don't think they're in a talking mood." "They will be when I tell them what happens if they destroy this ship. Trust me. Get me that channel." 2 minutes later, Captain Marcus Rivera found himself staring at a holographic display showing High Commander ZHK's six-eyed visage, the alien's expression radiating cold fury. "Human," ZHK's voice came through the translation software with barely controlled rage. "You have killed 400 of my soldiers. You have demonstrated capabilities we did not anticipate. You have earned my respect, and my hatred. Now you will die with whatever dignity that respect allows." Commander ZH Rivera replied, keeping his own voice steady despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. Before you destroy this ship, you should know that we've made preparations for that eventuality. Preparations that will cost you far more than 400 soldiers. ZH's mandibles spread in what might have been amusement. You believe you have some weapon that can threaten my fleet? You have no missiles, no functioning energy weapons, barely any power left at all. What possible threat could you pose? Not a weapon, Rivera said. Information. We've been broadcasting continuously since you began your pursuit 3 months ago. Every detail of your fleet composition, your tactics, your technology. Everything we've learned about the Krevthak during your invasion of our worlds. We've sent it all into deep space on laser-tight beams aimed at 7 different star systems where we know other species exist. Species you haven't conquered yet. Species that might be very interested to learn about Krevthak weaknesses. The alien commander's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering across his alien features. You're bluffing. You have no such capability. Try me, Rivera challenged. We've been broadcasting detailed schematics of your ships, analysis of your weapons, tactical assessments of your combat doctrine. We've included full documentation of how to exploit the one weakness you didn't even know you had, your dependence on gravity. 3 months of data transmissions, all heading toward civilizations you haven't reached yet. If you destroy this ship, those transmissions continue forever. But if you let us live, if you agree to leave us alone and depart this system, we'll provide you with the codes to shut down those transmissions before they reach their destinations. ZH studied him for a long moment, and Rivera could see the calculations happening behind those alien eyes. The Krevthak Empire's expansion had been predicated on technological and tactical superiority. If other species learned how to counter Krevthak advantages, particularly the critical vulnerability to zero-G tactics that had cost so many soldiers today, the Empire's future conquests would become significantly more difficult. You're bluffing, ZH repeated, but with less certainty now. Am I? Rivera pulled up a data pad, displaying coordinates and transmission vectors. Here are the exact positions of our laser communication arrays. They're positioned on the outer hull, still functional despite your bombardment because we specifically protected them. You can verify their existence with your sensors. You can verify that they're transmitting. What you can't do is stop those transmissions from reaching their destinations unless we give you the shutdown codes. So the question becomes, is it worth destroying us and ensuring that every species in this sector learns about your vulnerability to null-G tactics? Or is it worth accepting that you failed to extinguish humanity, and walking away while you still have some tactical advantages left? The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Rivera watched ZH's alien face, trying to read emotions in features that evolution had shaped for a completely different environment. Finally, the Krevthak commander spoke, his voice cold but controlled. If I accept your proposal, what guarantee do I have that you'll actually shut down these transmissions? You have my word, Rivera said simply. And you have the fact that we know what you're capable of. If we betray you, you'll hunt down every last human in the galaxy, and next time you won't make the mistake of trying to board us first. You'll just reduce our ships to atoms from a distance we can't possibly threaten. We both know how this ends if we break our word. So we won't. Give us our lives, and we'll give you the security of keeping your tactical weaknesses secret. ZH considered this for another long moment, then his mandibles clicked in what Rivera had learned to recognize as a gesture of resignation. Very well. You have 1 hour to shut down your transmissions and provide verification. If you do so, my fleet will withdraw and you will be permitted to continue your voyage unmolested. If you fail to do so, I will reduce your vessel to its component atoms and accept the consequences. Do we have an agreement? We have an agreement, Rivera confirmed, and the transmission ended. In the command center of Odyssey, Commander Chen stared at Rivera with an expression somewhere between awe and disbelief. Sir, We don't actually have laser communication arrays. We don't have the power to transmit anything. That was all a bluff. Rivera allowed himself a tired smile. I know. But ZH doesn't know that. And more importantly, he can't afford to find out we're bluffing, because if we're not, he's potentially compromised the next 1,000 years of Krevthak expansion. He's a soldier, Chen. He thinks in terms of tactical advantage and strategic risk. We just convinced him that the risk of destroying us is greater than the humiliation of letting us live. So what do we do now? We can't actually shut down transmissions that don't exist. We're going to create a very convincing performance, Rivera replied. Kowalski, can you rig up some electromagnetic interference that looks like we're powering down high-energy broadcast systems? The engineer's voice came back over the comm with tired amusement. Give me 45 minutes and I can create EM signatures that'll look like we're shutting down half a dozen different transmission arrays. It won't fool detailed sensor analysis, but if they're looking for confirmation of shutdown rather than checking whether the arrays existed in the first place, they'll see what they expect to see. Do it, Rivera ordered. Everyone, spread the word. We're standing down from combat operations. The Krevthak are withdrawing. We've won, but we need to sell the performance. I want everyone to act like we're exhausted, relieved, shutting down our last desperate gambit. Because that's exactly what we're doing, and if ZH suspects were bluffing, we're all dead. The next 45 minutes were the longest of Rivera's life. Chief Engineer Kowalski worked his technical magic, creating electromagnetic signatures that looked convincingly like high-powered transmitters shutting down in sequence. The Krevthak fleet maintained their bombardment positions, weapons hot, ready to annihilate Odyssey at the first sign of deception. And then, slowly, incredibly, the massive Krevthak warships began to move. They didn't flee. They weren't retreating in defeat. But they were withdrawing, pulling back from Odyssey with the deliberate precision of a military force executing a planned maneuver rather than a panicked escape. High Commander ZH watched the colony ship fall away on his view screens, his mind still wrestling with the impossible situation these primitive humans had created. He had lost 400 soldiers. He had been outfought in close combat by a species that should have been easy prey. He had been outmaneuvered in negotiations by a civilian spacecraft captain who had somehow turned potential extinction into survival. It was humiliating. It was unprecedented. It was, he admitted privately, strategically sound given the circumstances. If the humans truly had been broadcasting Krevthak tactical intelligence to other species, destroying them would have been an empty victory that poisoned future conquests. Better to withdraw, preserve the secrecy of Krevthak vulnerabilities, and accept the survival of a remnant human population that posed no immediate threat to the Empire. Mark this system as quarantined, ZH ordered. No Krevthak vessels are to approach within 10 light-years without authorization from the High Council. And transmit detailed reports of this engagement to all fleet commanders. Other species must be made aware that humans have developed advanced zero-G combat capabilities. Future operations against human targets should account for this tactical reality. What about these survivors? Vrikesh asked. If they reach a habitable system, they could rebuild. In 100 years, humanity could pose a renewed threat. ZH mandibles spread in a gesture that might have been respect. Let them survive. Let them rebuild. In 100 years, perhaps they will have evolved into something worthy of facing the Krevthak Empire as equals rather than victims. And if not? He let the implication hang in the air. There would always be another day for conquest. The Krevthak fleet engaged their faster-than-light drives and vanished into the cosmos, leaving the colony ship Odyssey alone in the darkness between stars. Captain Marcus Rivera watched them go from the command center, his entire body trembling with the adrenaline crash that followed their impossible survival. Around him, his skeleton crew sat in stunned silence, unable to quite process what had just happened. They had faced extinction and lived. They had fought the galaxy's most powerful empire and survived. "Captain," Commander Chen's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "What do we do now? We're damaged, we have 3,000 wounded, we've lost almost half our population. Where do we even go from here?" Rivera considered the question, looking at the star charts that showed possible destinations for their damaged ship. "We go forward," he said finally. "We find a system far from Krefthak space, far from any major civilizations. We find a planet that can support human life. We rebuild. We raise our children in 0G and teach them what we've learned, that humanity's strength isn't our technology or our weapons. It's our ability to adapt. To survive. To turn our weaknesses into advantages when we have no other choice." He activated the ship-wide communication system, his voice carrying to every compartment where survivors huddled in the darkness. "This is Captain Rivera. The Krefthak fleet has withdrawn. We have survived. I know you're exhausted. I know you've lost people you love. I know the cost of our survival has been terrible. But we are alive. Humanity continues. We are the last of our species, but we are not the end of our story. We are the beginning of something new." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "For 3 generations, humans have been visitors to space. We built ships that brought gravity with us, created environments that mimicked Earth. But that changes now. We've learned something the Krefthak never could, that we don't need gravity to survive. We don't need to carry Earth with us into the cosmos. We can adapt. We can evolve. We can become something new. Our children will be born in space," Rivera continued, his voice growing stronger. "They will grow up in 0G. They will develop muscles and reflexes and instincts perfectly adapted to the void. They will be the first generation of true spaceborne humans, and they will inherit a universe that has no idea what's coming." Throughout the ship, survivors listened to his words with various degrees of hope and determination. Parents held children who had been born on New Lisbon and who would now grow up among the stars. The wounded rested in medical bays while Dr. Okonkwo and her teams worked to save as many as possible. Engineers labored to keep life support functioning with what little power remained. And slowly, impossibly, life began to reassert itself aboard Odyssey. 3 days later, with their wounded stabilized and their systems repaired enough to risk faster-than-light travel, the colony ship engaged its damaged drives and limped toward a star system 50 light-years away. The system had been surveyed by human probes decades earlier. One marginally habitable planet, no intelligent life, rich in resources but far from any major trade routes or strategic interests. It was perfect for survivors who wanted nothing more than to be forgotten by the galaxy's major powers. 6 months after that, Odyssey entered orbit around what would become New Horizon, the first human colony founded by people who had been born on Earth but who had learned to live in the stars. The survivors who established that colony would tell their children about the day they fought the Krefthak Empire and won. They would pass down the story of how humanity's last stand became its rebirth, how 34,000 refugees became the founders of a new civilization. And those children, born in zero gravity, raised in the null-G sections of the colony's early habitats, would grow up knowing that they were different from the humans who had come before. They would be faster in null-G, stronger where it mattered, adapted to an environment that had once seemed hostile but now felt like home. 50 years later, when the first Krefthak scout ship entered the New Horizons system to verify that the humans had indeed settled as agreed, they found a thriving civilization of 200,000 people. Most of them had been born in space. All of them could move through 0G with the grace that had cost infantry commander Thraxon his life 5 decades earlier. The scout ship's captain transmitted a message to high command that would be studied in Krefthak military academies for centuries. The humans have adapted faster than anticipated. Recommend continued quarantine of this system. Further recommend updating combat doctrine for future encounters with space-adapted species. These humans are no longer the same species we invaded. They have become something new. High Commander ZH Carr, now retired and serving as an advisor to the Krevthak High Council, read that report in his quarters on the homeworld and allowed his mandibles to spread in what might have been a smile. He had been right to let them live. They had become worthy opponents, evolved in the span of 2 generations into something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that truly belonged in space, that had turned the void from an enemy to be conquered into a home to be cherished. Perhaps, in another few centuries, when both species had grown and changed, they might meet again. Not as conqueror and conquered, but as equals in the great arena of galactic civilization. But that was a question for future generations. For now, High Commander ZH Carr was content to have witnessed one of history's most remarkable adaptations, the transformation of humanity from planet dwellers who visited space into the first true children of the void. And somewhere in the New Horizons system, Captain Marcus Rivera, now elderly but still remembered as the man who saved humanity's last remnant, stood in a zero-G observation lounge and watched children play among the stars. They flew through the air with casual confidence, their movements fluid and natural in the absence of gravity. They had never known Earth. They had never walked on solid ground under an open sky. But they were alive, and they were human, and that was enough. That was everything. Behind him, his granddaughter Elena floated over and placed a hand on his shoulder. She had been born aboard Odyssey during the flight to New Horizon, one of the first generation to grow up entirely in space. Now she commanded her own ship, exploring systems beyond New Horizons' sphere of influence, charting paths that future colonies would follow. "Grandfather," she said softly, "they're saying the Krevthak have finally removed the quarantine on our system. We're free to travel beyond New Horizon." Rivera nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the playing children. "That means they no longer see us as a threat. We've proven we can survive, but we're too small to challenge them." Or, Elena suggested with a slight smile, "it means they understand what we've become and they're choosing to let us expand peacefully rather than forcing another confrontation." "Perhaps," Rivera conceded. "What will you do with this freedom?" "The same thing we've always done," Elena replied. "We'll explore. We'll establish new colonies. We'll teach our children to thrive in zero-G, to use the void the way other species use their homeworlds. And eventually, when there are enough of us spread across enough systems, when we're no longer 200,000 survivors but millions of space-adapted humans, we'll show the galaxy what we've learned." Rivera turned to look at his granddaughter, seeing in her eyes the same determination that had driven him to bluff High Commander ZH Carr 5 decades earlier. "And what have we learned?" "That you can't kill an idea," Elena said simply. "You can destroy planets. You can burn colonies. You can hunt down the last remnants of a species across the galaxy. But you can't kill the idea that humanity belongs among the stars. The Krevthak thought they were watching us die. Instead, they were watching us be born." She pushed off from the observation window, floating back toward the corridor with the unconscious grace of someone who had never known gravity's burden. "I'm taking my ship out tomorrow. There's a cluster of systems 30 light-years away that the probes say might support colonies. Want to come with us? One more exploration mission for the old captain?" Rivera laughed, a sound that carried genuine joy for the first time in years. "I think my exploring days are done. But you go. Find new worlds. Build new colonies. Show the galaxy what humans can become when we stop trying to bring Earth with us and start becoming something new." Elena smiled and disappeared down the corridor, leaving Rivera alone with his thoughts and the playing children who represented humanity's future. He thought about High Commander ZH Carr, wondered if the alien warrior understood that by letting Odyssey survive, he had fundamentally changed the trajectory of galactic history. The Krevthak had assumed that destroying Earth would end humanity. They had assumed that hunting down the survivors would finish the job. They had assumed that a species without a homeworld, without an industrial base, without anything but their own determination, would simply fade into extinction. They had been wrong about all of it. Humanity hadn't ended aboard Odyssey. It had transformed. It had evolved from a species that visited space into a species that lived there. And in the centuries to come, when human colonies spread across hundreds of systems, when millions of space-adapted humans moved through the void with the same confidence their ancestors once walked across continents, the galaxy would remember the last stand of the colony ship Odyssey as the moment when humanity stopped being just another planet-bound species and became something that the cosmos had never seen before. The children of the void. The survivors who had turned extinction into rebirth. The species that learned to fly in 0G while their would-be conquerors were still bound by the gravity of their own assumptions. Captain Marcus Rivera watched those children play among the stars, and he knew that humanity's story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning.